So our next speaker is Dr. Dave Burrow. He is the director of CDER's Office of Scientific Investigations, and he will be speaking to us about the transformation of trial design and conduct. He'll be sharing his perspectives on regulatory and enforcement considerations associated with various clinical trials innovation activities, including evolving study designs, operational approaches, and data sources such as real-world data. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Burrow.
Thank you. Really pleasure, that's a word, right? Pleasure to be here. So my title, right? Reimagining Clinical Research, Transformation of Trial Design and Conduct. That's a really long-winded way of saying this is a conversation about how we might be able to shift our perspective and make today the springboard into reimagining the way that we view ourselves and our roles in the clinical research industry. Now, my goal is to really be able to get you some valuable information in a usable format with enough humor to keep you interested, but not so much that makes you think I don't take it seriously, because I certainly do. Now, the real challenge here is in navigating a space of a really highly technical, complex, and global industry, all in real time. It seems like everything's shifting, changing in real time, very fluid and dynamic, and you're going to see that thread kind of woven throughout the course of the presentation today. My name, of course, is David Burrow, and we are in the Office of Scientific Investigations. That's the office that investigates scientifically. What that really means is that we're responsible for clinical trial assessment, compliance, enforcement, but that's also regulations, guidance, legislative development, and things like that. All of the different blends of herbs and spices that go into being a regulator, that all comes down to OSI and the clinical research conversation, and it's a really, really interesting space to be. Side note, you know, if you're ever going to receive a warning letter in clinical research, it's because I signed it, which is terrifying, both for you and for me. But, you know, it is a great space to be able to have this conversation, because it means that we have a real life discussion about what really matters in clinical research. Things that are not just administrative in nature, but what the real meat and potatoes are, why it matters in terms of protecting human research subjects and in driving quality in the data that we review as part of an application. So disclosures. I am a government employee, so I have nothing to disclose. Yay. Overview. Now, this is a pretty ambitious agenda for just 40 minutes. Not really sure how long it's going to take here. The central theme is, of course, on innovation, and that applies just as much to me as it does to everybody else. This is a little bit new talk for me, so I haven't run it before, don't really know how long it's going to take. And I'll share a secret with you. And the secret is that last topic, the lightning round, debunking FDA myths. See, the reason I included that was because I can kind of expand or contract that section to be able to fit the time that we have available to us here. And I know that a good magician doesn't reveal his tricks, but I'm not a magician, so I'll reveal my tricks freely here. But you'll see the overarching themes of evolving, dynamic research and the nature that we see in the global ecosystem here come up more and more as we get through these topics. The reason for that is because this is complicated. It's not just in clinical research generally, not just in innovation in a highly regulated space, but also in the ability to be able to get you some really easily consumable information in just 40 minutes. It's a real challenge here. And I'm going to do my very best to keep it interesting. One of the key points that I wanted to make sure that I could raise is that clinical research isn't just about the design and conduct and assessment of studies. There's a big component of that that's about you. It's the clinical research workforce and how we show up in our day-to-day lives across the spectrum of trial sites, trial designs, and all of that. And what you'll see in this picture here is that at every stage where a human is involved, we have the opportunity to muck it up. And that word, again, was muck with an M. It's the human element in clinical research that I think has the real room for us to take that next leap, that next great step in our evolution as a workforce and as an industry. Now, in the evolving clinical trial ecosystem, the reason I like to call it an ecosystem that evolves is because it really is one. That we have different study designs, different study execution strategies, operational approaches, and different data sources. We have different strategies for clinical trial assessment, including inspections and other things. But the reason this is an ecosystem is because it's so fluid and dynamic over the course of time. If you look back in the way that the industry was run, even just like 10 years ago, you have entities that were in place 10 years ago that are no longer with us. You have roles from 10 years ago that are no longer with us. You have roles today that weren't even envisioned back then. And just like evolution in an ecosystem, there are roles, people, skills, technologies, tools that die out. They are deemed unfit for survival. And clinical research is very same. It's a living, breathing, fluid, dynamic industry that evolves over time. And we as a clinical research workforce need to be really mindful of that and the fact that what was true yesterday might not be true tomorrow. Now, even when those entities, the roles, the vendors, the CROs, even when that changes over the course of time, we know that reimagining clinical research isn't about changing clinical research. Clinical research is going to change on its own. This ecosystem is going to continue to evolve. What we're really talking about is that reimagining clinical research is about changing how we think about clinical research and our role within this dynamic ecosystem. You always hear the term baby steps. People like to use the baby step idea because it's like small, tentative steps that you can continue to take over the course of time. But if you ever seen a baby walk, they don't take small, tentative steps. They have these really unbalanced but super enthusiastic steps forward. They lurch forward. And when we're talking about the baby steps that we get to take in clinical research to make tomorrow a better day, what we're really talking about is those lurches forward that we can take really enthusiastically together as an industry. Baby steps is absolutely the right term, but it's in a different context than you usually use it for. Now, one of the most critical parts in this conversation is about aligning on terminology. And it's an area that we in FDA and across industry tend to mess up all the time. We don't use the right terminology, we don't use it in the right context, and over the course of time in these types of conversations, some of these words that we continue to use cease to carry any meaning because we have overused them. What I've included here are just a couple different examples of things like operational approaches. You might look at decentralized clinical trials as being an operational approach. You could look at data sources like real world evidence, real world data. You could look at EHRs and things like that. And you could look at different types of trial designs like master protocols. Now, the reason that these conversations are so critical is because they aren't just one thing or the other. It's not right or wrong, yes or no, good or bad. All of this exists on a continuum. So you don't just have a decentralized clinical trial. You have a trial that has decentralized elements in it. You don't just have a pragmatic trial. You have a trial that has pragmatic elements in it. All of these exist on a continuum. And they can show up in very different ways depending on where you are in this ecosystem and the extent of control that you have over what's going on in your day-to-day operations. So even as designs for trials change, even as the operational approaches that are deployed here change, and even as the data sources that we use continue to change, there is a constant. The constant is us. It's the clinical research workforce, which gets us to the idea of how the evolution, the transformation of clinical trial design and conduct, it's not about clinical research as an like vague amorphous entity. It's about us and re-envisioning the way that we engage in this industry. Make your peace with the fact that clinical research is going to change on its own. It is a really dynamic and fluid industry. And our role is to shift the way that we think about innovation in clinical research to appreciate those leverage points, those key points where we have the opportunity to intervene to make tomorrow a better day, to ask ourselves, how do we make this 10% better? That's the crux of the conversation here. We are the constant in this fluid, dynamic ecosystem of clinical research. Now, when we get into the conversation about innovation, it's a great buzzword, but it's a buzzword that for me is kind of a pet peeve because we have overused the idea of innovation. Because as I noted just a second ago, clinical research is innovation. It's innovation in novel treatments. It's innovation in clinical practice. Clinical research is innovation. So when you talk about how we innovate clinical research, you're talking about how do we innovate innovation. It gets to be a really complicated conversation. And, you know, we know that innovation does not mean new. You can have incredible innovations in clinical research that are not things that are brand new. They're just upscaled, reused in a different context. And in that new context, it is an innovation. But you know, the key there is that innovation doesn't mean you have to do something brand new in industry. And things that are new are not necessarily better. Just because it's new doesn't necessarily mean that that's an innovation that's going to drive improvements in clinical research over time. What matters is why. Why are you choosing to change something? And you know, you can think about that in a couple different ways, right? The choice to make a change. It could be because your boss told you to change something. It could be because innovation is a buzzword. Or it could be because you have recognized that you have a gap in your operational processes and there's a chance to make things just 10% better. That why, choosing to do something with intent, with knowledge, because it is something that you believe is going to show improvements in your operations over time, that is the crux of innovation. Not just because it's new, because new isn't always better. And you know, when I when I start to think about things like this, I'm going to have to ask for your patience because I have a metaphor that I tend to use, and that's about cheese. So I apologize to all of you lactose intolerant members of our audience, but well-aged cheese is a fantastic delicacy. Well-aged cheese is rare. It's of the highest quality. It is really, really valuable, and it's delicious. But that block of cheddar that you have sitting in the back of your refrigerator for 5 years is not the same as well-aged cheese, right? Well-aged cheese is not necessarily old cheese. The same thing comes up in the conversation of experience versus expertise. When you talk about the clinical research workforce, we've heard this standard that you have to have 2 years of experience to be able to qualify for even the most basic entry-level positions. But I would encourage us to think about the distinctions between experience and expertise. That old cheese isn't necessarily good cheese. I would encourage us to think about the qualities that we look for in our dairy products and the qualities that we look for in our clinical research professionals that are going to help us to take the clinical research enterprise to the next level. The skill sets of yesterday are not the skill sets of tomorrow. We need to be able to evolve our workforce, evolve our skill sets in order to be able to meet the needs of tomorrow. So we know quality by design, it's a very well socialized idea. I think quality by design has probably been around for more than 15 years now, but it is all too often misunderstood. And we know that every person who competes in a race has the same goal. The goal is to win the race, but the goal is not what matters. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems and preparation. And that is the very nature of quality by design. I really just don't think there's just a better way to explain quality by design. It's the decisions that you can take to be able to drive the systems and the preparation to make sure that the errors that occur in a trial are errors that don't matter to the critical endpoints that you're looking at, to the safety and efficacy data for the trials. It's about systems and preparation. Now, QBD, for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the idea, is simply that you're looking for the absence of errors that matter. The issue there is that we know that perfection is unattainable, that errors are going to happen in clinical research. Even the very best study design, the best structured operational approaches, even the very best sites are going to have things that just don't go quite right. Quality by design is the systems and preparation that goes into designing a study where you expect to minimize the presence of the errors that truly do matter. Now, again, that's a frame of mind. It's a shift in the way that we view this. We're looking at speed bumps. Speed bumps are acceptable. Errors are going to happen. What you're trying to do is to avoid the roadblocks, the things that represent significant challenges in our ability to have reliable data of safety and efficacy as an outcome for these trials. You know, there's a great boxer back in the day, Mike Tyson. You might have heard of him. He was famous because he could knock out an opponent, a professional boxer, in just seconds. And, you know, it was one of those things where at that point in time, when he was getting ready for a match with a new opponent, his opponents would say, I've studied the film. I know how to beat him. They'd have all of their strategies in place. And Mike's response was, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And it's true. That is clinical research. Everyone has a plan until things start to go sideways. Quality by design is about understanding the ways that things can go wrong and understanding how to mitigate the potential catastrophic impacts of them when they do go wrong. It's about being able to get hit, but not knocked out. That is quality by design. It's the absence of errors that matter in clinical research. Now, this is gritty. It's challenging work. It's not easy. And it's in the execution that I think the challenge lays. That's where we come into play as the clinical research workforce. The one constant in this industry, we, the clinical research workforce, have the opportunity to bring about that true and lasting change. Now, the best thing I can say here is that you're not alone. Quality by Design has a wealth of information out there in the public domain. What I'm showing you here is the CDER, that's the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative webpage. They have toolkits, resources, information of all kinds, different frameworks and models that you can pull down from the web and use to your benefit. This is all out there. And this is really scary stuff, for sure. When you're talking about changing the way that you operate in an individual study, for a site, for a company, when you're talking about changes in the way that you operate, you're talking about a great leap into the unknown. And that takes courage. It takes courage to be able to innovate. It takes courage to be able to actively choose to do something different when you don't really know what the outcome is. And that word courage can be defined as knowing something that might hurt, but doing it anyway. But stupidity has the very same definition, knowing that something might hurt, but doing it anyway. And that's why life is hard. But what matters is why you choose to do that. Just like we were talking about before, in Quality by Design, it's about knowing why you're making that change. Is it because you believe that making this change can improve your outcomes by 10%? Or are you making this change because you were told you had to do it, because it's the new and shiny thing, or something like that? The why is really what matters in Quality by Design. So please understand that point, that change for the sake of change serves no purpose. That the key in Quality by Design, the key in innovation is identifying why you're doing what you're doing, not just change for the sake of change. Now, in Quality by Design, if you were looking for a single place to start, I would highly recommend the Principles document. Principles document, absolutely essential resource for you. And I love the idea, or I guess the quote, that a goal without a plan is just a fantasy. Quality by Design and these documents, these resources, give you the information you need in order to be able to take that goal and take it from a fantasy, make it into a reality. It gives you actionable steps that you can put into place in real time at your site, at your company, at your institution to be able to make things just a little bit better. Two things I really wanted to point out here. First is that it's not a checklist. It's not a checklist idea. When you get back to the slides I shared just a minute ago, you see that virtually infinite variability in the way that trial designs, operational approaches, and data sources can come up, different variability in the way that you see clinical research sites positioned to be able to meet the needs of individual trials, given their unique systems and endpoints and the tests that you might need to do in support of that clinical trial. Virtually infinite variability. And that means that a checklist mentality doesn't work. You have to be able to think through what the specific risks of your trial might be and how you might best position yourself and your sites to be able to meet that need. And the last question or the last point here, can't overemphasize or underemphasize it. Can't say it enough. The emphasis in engaging all stakeholders early on in your trial design conversations, absolutely critical. Because nobody can write a symphony alone. We know that this is something that really takes a conversation. There are a lot of different parties in place here, and we need to be able to make sure that your quality by design, your risk assessments, talk not just with your sponsors, your CROs, your vendors, but also with your different sites, because each of those different sites is going to deploy an individual protocol with a different infrastructure. And you need to know how that's going to play out across the different sites that you're working with. One of the big parts here, that people, it's the human factors that I have at the very bottom of the screen here. And dealing with the human factors is something that I think we all too often just gloss over. The personnel, because you can't underestimate the impact that one individual at your institution can have on the outcome of a trial, on the experience of the patients, on the experience of your other study team members. The human factors that are involved here are really critical. And when you're talking about a poor performing employee or somebody that has having a negative impact on your trial as a whole, you're talking about the really hard, the gritty, the sand in your bathing suit type of work that we need to be able to do to be able to improve the outcomes that we're looking for. That's necessary as part of the growth for the industry. But even as necessary as it is, we just simply cannot allow a wishbone to grow where a backbone should. Even though it's hard, this is the hard work that's necessary for us to be able to really change the dynamic of how we engage in this ecosystem. And if you're looking for a visual representation of quality by design, you need look no further than this. You got to remember that idea that we can do anything, but we can't do everything. That applies in quality by design, in the structure of clinical research, generally. We can do anything, but we can't do everything. You have to be able to identify what really matters in the context of your clinical trial for the unique needs of that site, that patient population, that endpoint, or what have you. Now, CDER has an incredible portfolio of programs in operation right now. These are all legacy programs. They are out there available to anyone, and they are all directed at advancing clinical research in CDER. These are opportunities for sponsors and applicants to engage with the agency to increase the chance of success, decreasing the chance that errors are going to happen on the back end. I would highly recommend anyone who has the opportunity to engage with the agency on any of these programs to do so. They are well worth the time and effort. You see a lot of common themes here too. Decentralized clinical trials, real world evidence, rare diseases. These are all opportunities where CDER, where the FDA has dedicated resources to be able to ensure that we can further support innovation in these very targeted areas. Absolutely worth the time if you have the opportunity. But if you can't, if you aren't in a position to be able to make use of those programs, if you're looking for additional resources, FDA has a wealth of guidances out there. They come out just about every week. Real world evidence, DCTs, RIEs, RRAs, you have the acronym alphabet soup out there all the time. And some of you might find these resources to be incredibly helpful. Others might find these guidances to be about as helpful as the letter G in the word lasagna. And there are always more guidances. They continue to come out. And one of the challenges for us in the agency is being able to get current thinking out in a way that makes it really timely. We navigate good guidance practices, the Administrative Procedures Act, notice and comment rulemaking, and that means that we can't just get guidance out there at the drop of the hat. It's something that we have to do with clear deliberation and intent to make sure that what we put out there in the public domain is true and accurate reflection that allows us to continue this growth innovation journey in the industry generally. Make no mistake, the F in FDA stands for flexibility here. Now, after talking about the existing CDER innovation programs and all of the guidances out there, all of us are probably going to have one of three looks on our faces. You're either going to look like this, where loosely translated, it could be like, huh, what does this mean for me? I don't know, it doesn't make sense. Or you could look something like this, where it's just like, how do I do this? What am I supposed to do? Where is the chase and how do we cut to it? Or you could have this kind of look on your face, in which case it might be time for happy hour or some other solution for the stress and anxiety of the day. But be that as it may, have no fear, because the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research has come up with a new CDER Center for Clinical Trial Innovation. I always stumble over that, C3TI for short. Now, there are an incredible wealth of resources on the C3TI website. This was just released in mid-April, April 15th. So if you haven't already digested all the information on CDER's webpage about C3TI, I highly recommend you do so. That will connect you to those innovation programs that I shared a few slides ago. It'll also get you that direct line of communication. It's like a concierge service for innovation in CDER. And our objectives here are really in making sure that we can facilitate the sharing of lessons learned so that those lessons learned from innovations in the past can be captured appropriately and shared to industry so that we can continue to build that tidal volume of awareness. We also want to be able to communicate and collaborate with external stakeholders. That's you. Hi. This is an opportunity for us to have conversations about what might be done in clinical research to make things 10% better, to identify the big problems and put solutions together that are going to help to mitigate those challenges, to take us one step forward, baby steps, unsteady, excited lurches forward together. And lastly, we have the demonstration programs. That's just a fancy word for pilots. I'm putting together several pilots that are dedicated at looking at very specific aspects of clinical trial innovation to see how we might be able to work together to be able to take that one step forward. So please, if you haven't already done so, take a look at the FDA webpage for C3TI and all of the resources that are available to help advance innovation in clinical research for drugs. Now that takes us to the regulation of clinical research. My personal thoughts on how this plays out. See, balance is absolutely essential because we need to be able to balance the level of specificity that we have in our regs and our guidance with the need for flexibility. Understanding that this is a global industry, that we are not the only regulators who are engaged in these conversations. We are one of many, and we don't always get to hold the pen. Surprise, surprise. We have to be able to maintain that balance, the operational agility to be able to ensure that what we put out in the public domain as regulators is something that provides value as the baseline for expectations for clinical trial design, conduct, and reporting. But we aren't providing the ideal state because we need to be able to have that operational agility. We have to understand the vast differences in sophistication across trial sites and being able to ensure that all of those sites have what they need in order to be able to succeed. So we have to be able to have that balance, the agility, providing a baseline standard that's flexible in this global environment where we are not the only regulators who have a stake in the conversation. And what that really brings us back down to is this idea that we need to focus on our critical interests just like you do in quality by design. We have to focus on the interests of reliable clinical trial data supporting safety and efficacy. fit for purpose ideas across the ecosystem. And those critical interests serve as our North Star, regardless of if we're talking about a new policy, a new guidance, or new regs. Focusing on those critical interests in the clinical research industry and ecosystem as they exist today, and preparing for what they might look like downstream. And that means that we have to be aware of this time-space continuum. And I use that because the drug development industry isn't something that happens overnight. If you start the development of a clinical trial design right now, you're operating with 2024 information, 2024 guidance, feedback, expectations. But even if you start that trial now, once you get it set up and stood up all of the clinical trial sites, once you run that trial, it might be a trial that takes a year to complete. Then you compile all of the data and you work up the NDA and submit that to the agency. It could be 5 years or more downstream. So what is true today when you start that risk assessment might not be true 5 years from now or more when you submit that application. So we as regulators need to be able to understand the time-space continuum and ask ourselves if those choices were reasonable at the time that you had to make them, not necessarily when that application comes into the agency, because we cannot sacrifice the statistical and scientific rigor of the application review process. We need to know that these drugs are products that work and are safe for their intended purposes. Now, the role of perspective here is a really interesting one because it is a fluid and dynamic environment. There are subtle shifts in the phrases that we use, like I love explanation versus an excuse. When you're talking about the conversations with the agency, provide explanations for what you did, not excuses. Provide responses to the inquiries that we have, not reactions. Make it deliberate. Fully considering all the potential impacts of what you're saying, what you're doing, and how that might play out. And understand, of course, that role of people on people. We talked about that before, the human factors that are involved in clinical research and the critical role that the clinical research workforce plays in driving quality at the macro level. Because we know that perfection is unattainable, that we aren't going to have perfectly designed and perfectly run clinical trials across many, many different clinical sites. That's just not the way that it works. We're trying to minimize the chance that errors that matter, in fact, come into play. Now, lightning round debunking FDA myths. I included this because I can expand or contract it, right? And I'll go through this pretty quick because I am a little longer than I thought it would. So normalizing the inspection process, who knows what and when? This is a question that we get all the time. And the way that that shows up is in people thinking that sponsors and applicants know which clinical sites are going to be inspected for the review of an application. It's not true. Sponsors don't know where we are going to inspect when we are doing the inspections to review a pre-market application. We select sites for inspection based on the use of a clinical investigator site selection tool, CIST for short. It takes into account 26 different factors at the application level, the site level, and the study level, and gives us a risk score. But we don't just go to the sites number 1, 2, and 3 on the risk score. It's a tool and not a rule. And we can determine which sites we want to inspect based on whatever the risk profile is for that product, what we know about the portfolio of sites that are contributing data for that application. So a sponsor doesn't know where we're going to go, but they could suspect it because the sponsor knows their enrollment numbers. They know who the highest enrolling sites are. They know which sites might be driving the efficacy assessments. So they could suspect that we might inspect individual sites, but they're not going to know. That's not information that sponsors have. What does it mean to pass an inspection? Well, this question requires context because for a clinical site, passing an inspection could just mean not getting a 483. But that isn't passing an inspection in every context, because for a sponsor who's really dedicated and interested in knowing that the application that they submit to the agency is going to get approval, we could have findings from inspections that don't have 483s that contribute significant information in the review of the application. So even though the CI doesn't get a 483, that very same inspection could result in throwing out data from a site or series of sites. It could result in getting an information request or running a sensitivity analysis or something like that, just because you don't get a 43 doesn't necessarily mean that you pass, in air quotes, an inspection from every stakeholder's perspective. So what does it mean to get a 43? That is inspection observations. Our ORA colleagues are at your site for just a week or maybe a little more. They don't have access to a ton of information. They just have access to what they can get while they're there. A 43 is the inspection observations. The bioresearch monitoring program is set up so that all of those decisions about the final classification, what is a true violation of significance, all of those come back to the center. The center makes all of those decisions. So a 43 is really just your opportunity to know what you need to respond to the agency about. A 43 could be viewed as a good thing because it gives you the opportunity to frame the issues in the light most favorable to you in your response to the 43. If you didn't get a 43, if those same options or items were just discussion items in an EIR, you wouldn't have the opportunity, or you wouldn't know that you had the option there to just respond to the agency and help to frame those issues in the light that is absolutely most favorable to you. 43, strictly inspection observations, not a reflection of the final agency decision or compliance outcome at all. How do inspections inform the review of an application? Well, I kind of covered this one already, but an inspection could result in findings that require us to throw out the data from that individual site. But it could also impact the review of the study as a whole. It could not just be one site, but a group of sites. Could be information that allows us to do these other things. How does OSI's recommendation impact the review? It could be things that allow us to request or recommend a sensitivity analysis, additional inspections. We could recommend additional inspections. We could do an information request to ask the sponsor or applicant to explain to us how something showed up and what they did about it to help understand the context of whatever that issue is. Or we could request an independent third-party audit. And when I say something like that, it should make those little money hairs on the back of your neck stand up and just go, whoa, 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 because an independent third-party audit is going to cost both time and money. It could delay the approval of a product, and it could cost a tremendous amount of money. So those independent third-party audits could have a really significant impact on the review of your application, both in terms of time and the outcome, the end result. And how do you avoid a poor outcome? Well, the key there, I kind of covered in response to a 43. Absolutely respond to a 43. Engage in those conversations with the regulators, with the agency. Open, honest conversations, providing explanations, not excuses, responses rather than reactions. And in your 43 response, make sure that you cover what is factually accurate in your 43, what is a real regulatory requirement. So if you look at your protocol and you see those words like should or may versus must and shall, your 43 response is where you highlight the dirty words of clinical research. If it says may, you may do it, you may not. It's not a violation. If it says should, you should do it, but it doesn't say must, not a violation. You avoid a poor outcome by making our reviewers' lives as easy as possible by giving them that information in an easily consumable format with all of the supporting documentation that we need to be able to say, yes, that's actually true, and agree with you. So absolutely avoid that poor outcome, responding to a 43 and having those open and honest conversations with the agency. So when we talk about reimagining clinical research, we already talked about what does innovation mean? Clinical research is innovation, and new isn't always better. What matters is why we're choosing to change the way that we operate, what the risk is that we're trying to mitigate, what we expect, and how we might be able to make things just 10% better. Quality by design, I think the next evolution for me, like in my own twisted head, is the real awareness of how different clinical sites operationalize the same protocol. It's understanding the unique needs of individual clinical trial sites and really considering that as part of your design phase conversations. The next evolution is about the operational realities at the vast differences or in the vast differences that you see across trial sites. And there really is no end, right? You can't just innovate and be like, well, we did our job. This is a conversation that continues to move, to evolve. It's very fluid and dynamic. We used to say that, it's a marathon, not a sprint, but this isn't even a race. There's no end to it. You just continue to ask yourself, what might make sense? What is reasonable for us to be able to do? What risks are we trying to mitigate, and how might that show up for us? I love Gallup Strength Finder. Everybody know what that is? In Strength Finder, my number one strength is futuristic. That means I look at everything with a future context. And I don't mean like tomorrow or a week from now. I mean like years down the road. I can't help it. It's a compulsion that I always look at everything with a future context. And that is both a blessing and a curse, but it allows me to know that one day we are going to have clinical research embedded in our clinical care system. One day we know that anybody would be able to view clinical research as a care option and have access to that when and where they need. That access is going to be there. I know that one day that's going to be true. I also know that one day the clinical research profession is going to be recognized as a profession, that the skill sets that you deploy day in, day out in this really complicated, fluid, dynamic, global, and highly technical industry, it's going to be something that resonates with the American public as a profession, an opportunity to be able to get involved. And I know that one day we're going to use all of the tools, the technologies, the systems, the data that we have at our disposal to their maximum utility. I know that that is true. But I also know that perspective matters and small changes can make a big difference. So what if, just what if, we took that one day and we made it that this is day one? How might it look differently if this was day one of knowing that clinical research was a care option to anybody who needed it, that they had access when and where they needed? If this was day one, how might we act as if that is our reality starting today? How might we act as if it is our reality today? If this is day one of clinical research being a profession where we act as though this is the central crux of our identity as an industry, how might we act? What would it look like if we knew that today was day one of using the tools, the technology, the data systems, all the resources that are at our disposal right now? What if this was day one of using all of that to their maximum benefit starting today? Now, if we started to use the resources at our disposal to their maximum use, and if we started to make those changes, if we started to make this day one of those small changes that then compound day after day, it's going to result in our one day becoming our everyday. And that is, I think, a really incredibly powerful message of transforming clinical research, reimagining the way that we operate as an industry, what we might be able to do as a clinical research workforce to really advance innovation in clinical research, because clinical research by itself is innovation. We are the constant, and we have the power to be able to take clinical research to the next level. I feel like that's a really powerful message, empowering us all as an industry to be able to do incredible work for the public health benefit, to be able to improve the quality of the data that is submitted in support of the marketing applications, and in protecting human research subjects who choose to participate in clinical research. Now, I've included a ton of different resources here, more than enough to keep you busy for a hot minute. And I recognize that I'm way over time here, so I will pause for questions if there are any. I'll hang around afterwards if you'd like to talk to.
Thank you, Dr. Burrow. So I think we have time for just a few questions. Anybody in the room?
Crickets.
Anyone? Oh, we have one.
Hi.
Hi.
Question about pragmatic trials and pragmatic elements. What is the FDA doing to prevent pragmatic elements being exploited by ill-intended sponsor companies?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because we don't usually plan the way that we operate in order to prevent exploitation in clinical research, right? Certainly not in trial design and operational approaches and the way that we structure that type of thing. But we do know that pragmatic trials and point of care trials are a hot button issue for the agency right now. And I think you can probably expect to get some more information about that in the not too distant future.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Should we take an online question?
We have a question about FDA's willingness to accept more single-arm trials. We all know the gold standard is the randomized placebo-controlled trial, but there are many underserved patient populations in which sponsors feel it is unethical for patients to not get the active drug/biologic. How can we maximize opportunities to utilize historical or external control populations, even those that are less robust in the eyes of the agency?
That's the easiest question I'm ever going to get. And the reason is that that's a conversation that you need to have with a review division, given the unique nature of whatever your patient population indication trial design is. Definitely a conversation you need to have with them.
Anyone else in the room with a question? Okay, let's take one more online question.
What do you see as the greatest stumbling block that stands in the way of true implementation of quality by design and risk-based quality management systems?
Well, I think that we fall into a pretty common pitfall of thinking that what we do to really implement quality by design is like you do it and you're done. And I think one of the key messages that you heard from me here today is that this is a really evolving conversation, and what could be the very best thing for you today to do today in quality by design might not be true a year from now. So the very best thing you can do, the stumbling block that people all too often fall into, is that idea that you just dust off what you did for your last trial and redo that again because you used quality by design for your last trial last year, and you don't rethink, do that analysis again. The stumbling block is that we feel like if we've done it in the past, we can do it in the future, and that's not always or not necessarily going to be true.
Sorry, I know we were done. I loved your quote about we can do anything, but we can't do everything. I'm sure you hear a lot people's fear of not doing everything because, is the inspector going to find that one thing that I didn't do? And are they going to accept that I accepted a risk there? So sort of how do you respond to people with that fear?
Yeah, some of the most dangerous words we can use is like, could you just? And when you're talking about an organization, like a company that's coming up with a new protocol, everybody has their hands in the pot there. Everybody wants their data. They want to add exploratory endpoints or secondary endpoints, tertiary endpoints. They want to add more because they figure if you're investing in the infrastructure to be able to design and operationalize a trial, they want to be able to get everything that they can for it, which is directly contrary to the core interests of lean trials. Quality by design, cutting out the extraneous tasks, data, information like that, and focusing on truly what matters. So the conversation always comes back to what really matters here and balancing those operational realities of how anything extra might play out in real time across the spectrum of the different trial sites. The danger is that all too often when sponsors or CROs reach out to sites to be able to talk with them about how a trial might play out for them, they talk to their favorite sites. They talk to their best sites. But the reality is that when you're talking about 100 different sites, what was true for your very best, very favorite site is probably not true for the 99% of the other sites. So you really need to be able to have those conversations with a spectrum of the different sophistication levels in your sites. But it really does come down to that idea of what really matters and what the relative risk is going to be in practice.
Great, I think we're out of time for questions. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Ranjani Prabhakara. She is the policy lead in CDER's Office of Policy for Pharmaceutical Quality. She will provide us with an introduction to the FDA guidance Advanced Manufacturing Technologies Designation Program, which contains recommendations to persons and organizations interested in participating in the program, and details about key concepts important for program utilization. Thank you.
I want to thank SBIA for having me here today. And for those of you who know me in real life, I normally have a huge booming voice, but I'm currently fighting my nemesis, grass pollen, and it's winning. So hopefully my voice will last throughout the entire talk without too many issues. Again, my name is Ranjani. I'm here representing the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, Office of Policy for Pharmaceutical Quality, where I am a policy lead, and I'll be discussing the Advanced Manufacturing Technologies, or AMT for short, designation program. Oh, just hitting the wrong button. Sorry about that. So very quickly, I just want to go over our learning objectives for today. The first one is to just give a high-level definition of what we mean when we talk about pharmaceutical quality. We'd like to introduce the Advanced Manufacturing Technologies Designation Program and summarize feedback from the Innovative Manufacturing Public Workshop that was held in June of last year. I'll talk about this a little bit more. And I would like to provide an overview of the guidance that was published. The draft guidance was published in December of last year for the AMT designation program. And as part of this is the majority of my talk. I'm going to describe the background of the guidance, how we got here, why we have this guidance. I'd like to spend some time talking about the program processes and benefits as they're described in the guidance, and also do a little bit of comparing and contrasting with a few related FDA programs. So what is pharmaceutical quality? So a quality product of any kind is one that essentially meets the expectations of the user. When you turn your computer on, you don't want it to glitch. When you go out to your car in the morning to go to work, you want it to start. When you want to make a phone call, you want your phone to work. So you want those items to meet the expectations of you, the user. And drugs should really be no different. So what it is this idea that everyone deserves confidence in the next dose of their medicine. So pharmaceutical quality assures the availability, safety, and efficacy of every dose of medication. So if you took a pill this morning, the pill you take this evening should be as high quality as that pill you took this morning. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit now and talk about advanced manufacturing, more like a high-level discussion of what advanced manufacturing is. So when we talk about advanced manufacturing, or I know this is innovative manufacturing, it's all related. It's new manufacturing technologies that can include things like integrating novel approaches, or using established techniques in an innovative way. So this was something that Dr. Burrow brought up, that it doesn't always have to be new. It can be something that you're just using in a different way. And important, it can be technologies that are applied in a new domain where there aren't necessarily defined best practices and experience. So you're learning as you go to some extent. And I also want to point out that in every field, there are different production techniques that are considered advanced. So we're in here today for the CDER track. It could be that something that is really novel and really innovative in the field of, say, small molecules may not necessarily be all that innovative for, say, large molecule drugs or biologics. Maybe it's something they've been doing a long time. The same could be said for medical devices. So in every field, it can be a little bit different. So one of the things we talk about with innovation is it's scary, it's expensive. You don't know if it's going to work. You don't know if it's going to slow down the approval of your product. So why do we want to even consider advanced manufacturing? And most importantly, I am from the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, it's the production of high and higher quality drugs is a key reason. And related to that, the prevention of drug shortages due to quality-related manufacturing issues. This is still the #1 reason for drug shortages that we've had in the recent past, that we have today, that we're probably going to have in the future. Faster drug development, especially when we're talking about rare diseases or unmet medical needs. Advanced manufacturing can help bring these drugs to market faster. And it can also strengthen domestic drug manufacturing. And one of the reasons we care about all of those things is advanced manufacturing can provide greater agility and flexibility. For example, during a public health emergency, and I need not point out that we've recently gone through this, and it's really, we don't know when this is going to happen again. So advanced manufacturing can help us as we go into these sorts of situations. So that was advanced manufacturing, broadly speaking. Now I'm going to specifically talk about the Advanced Manufacturing Technologies Designation Program. So this is a specific program, and it all started in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023, which was a large omnibus spending bill. It was signed into law on December 29th of 2022. And this is a huge bill. It's thousands of pages long. It is full of all kinds of foreign and domestic policy initiatives. I couldn't even begin to tell you about all of them, but there are in there several quality-related provisions. And they fall mainly into two parts of the bill. The first one being the Prevent Pandemics Act, or Title II. And here, I'm not going to list these all off, but you can see that there's a couple of different programs there. And then the second one is the Food and Drug Omnibus Reform Act of 2022, or FDORA. We joke it is like the hat, also called Title III. And in here, Section 3213 is where we find the Advanced Manufacturing Technologies Designation Program. So what is an advanced manufacturing technology? And there's probably a couple of different ways to define it. The way we're defining it here is actually taken from the statute, taken from FDORA. And the last thing anybody wants on a Thursday or any other afternoon is to have someone stand up here and read statutory language to them. So I do have the statutory language here. I'm not going to read it to you. Instead, I want to just point out, highlighted in red, some of the important concepts. And the first one is that an AMT is a method of manufacturing or a combination of manufacturing methods. And this combination of methods, or this method, should include a novel technology or an established technology used in a novel way. So that's very important. It's novel, or it's being used in a novel way. It's a method of manufacturing, but that's not enough. Novelty is not enough. It also has to substantially improve the manufacturing process for that drug while maintaining equivalent or better superior drug quality. And this is also explained in the statute as substantially improving something. The manufacturing of a drug involves reducing development time for that drug that's using that method, or increasing or maintaining the supply of that drug. And in this case, it's specifically a life-supporting, life-sustaining, or another drug of critical importance to health. And as we pointed out, drug shortages, it can also be of a drug that is on the drug shortage list. So the statute also goes on to describe the program, what the program is all about. We know what an AMT is now. What is the AMT designation program? So 1 year after enactment of FDORA, we, FDA, had to initiate this program to request designation. And this is designation as an AMT. And as part of that, we need to have a process for designation. So what is it to have a designation or to get a designation? And of course, we need a way to evaluate the requests that we get and make decisions about what will be a designated AMT. And so as part of that, there obviously has to be some sort of submission to the agency. And here, the statute talks about the need for data and information that essentially demonstrates that that method of manufacturing or proposed AMT meets the criteria in the statute. And I'll talk more about the criteria, and also that it's in a particular context of use. So I'm going to stop and do a quick challenge question. Which of the following does not describe an AMT? Is it A, limited to one method of manufacturing per AMT, can use an established technique or technology in a novel way, that substantially improves the manufacturing process for a drug, or that it can provide either equivalent or superior drug quality? And the answer is A, it's not necessarily limited to one method. It could be a combination of methods, either novel or established, but that are put together in a novel way. So I mentioned this workshop, and I want to talk a little bit about this workshop. This took place on June 8th of 2023. I don't know if anybody here was there, but it was called Advancing the Utilization and Supporting the Implementation and Innovative Manufacturing Approaches. And it was hosted by the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy. And the reason we had this workshop, we do a lot of things because the statute tells us we have to do it, but that's not the only reason we do it. The point of this meeting essentially was it fulfilled FDORA and PDUFA 7 commitments. And so we put them all together into this one meeting on innovative manufacturing. And it was a really cool meeting. It was a full day. There were a variety of FDA officials there, pharmaceutical industry representatives, and also several people from academia. And what the discussion focused on was the current state of innovative manufacturing technologies and incentives for their widespread adoption. Because again, these sorts of innovative advanced technologies have a lot that they can bring to manufacturing, but there needs to be a way to incentivize companies to use them. So throughout the meeting, there were a series of panels led by FDA colleagues of mine, and the very last one of the day was about AMTs. So I just want to go through some of the key takeaways. And in this panel, FDA, we were really there in a listening capacity. This was before we had started drafting the draft guidance, and we wanted to know what was important to industry and to academia. Like, what did people want out of this guidance? And what we heard was that there was support for the general approach, and people felt like, yes, this program could encourage greater adoption of AMTs. And another thing that we heard, and something that makes this program a little bit unique, is there was a lot of support for the idea that the AMT designation program is not intended only for applicants and sponsors. It can be anybody who has something that meets the eligibility criteria and can give us the data and information to support it. You can participate in this program. And again, we also wanted to get a lot of feedback about what people wanted in the guidance. And there was an expression that we needed a balance between flexibility and certainty, which makes sense because we want to have some regulatory certainty. But on the other hand, we're talking about new, novel things. There needs to be some flexibility. We don't know what we don't know. We can't see what we haven't seen yet. So there also has to be some flexibility there. And again, clarity on the benefits of participating in the program, because again, new things are scary and they're expensive, and there has to be some benefit to getting people on board with this program. And there was also a feeling that it was important that we define key elements from the statute. So some examples being data and information. What is that data? What's that information? What do you mean by context of use? This is a term that we hear a lot, and it can mean slightly different things in, well, different contexts. So So we did that in June, and then the statute required that we then had to go on to develop a guidance. So why were we developing this guidance? Of course, I'm going to point back to the statute. In a way, we had to. Fedora said that not later than 180 days after the public meeting, so that's that June 8th meeting that I just talked about, we would have to issue draft guidance regarding the goals and implementation of the AMT designation program. And this is still in process, but not later than 2 years after the date of enactment would be the final guidance, issuance of the final guidance for implementation. So what does this guidance cover? And I've talked about guidances here and there in the past, and what I really like to do is not just read what's in the guidance, but actually try to interpret it and make it useful for the people who are listening. So the guidance, and again, this is out of Fedora, out of the statute, it has to cover content. That's in the law. We have to describe the content of the program. And that includes the process. We talked about the process by which a person may request a designation. So if you have this technology and you think it could be a good candidate for the program, there has to be a process by which somebody can request that designation. And if there's a process by which you can request designation, then you really need to know the data and information that you have to submit to support that request. And once the designation has been made, ultimately the goal is to get these AMTs into applications so that they can actually help expedite drug development. In that, when we get to that step, well, we need a process to figure out, well, how are we actually expediting the development and the review of these applications? And of course, most importantly, the criteria for eligibility, because that is really going to describe everything else that's here. So why do we need a guidance? Well, obviously, we have to have a guidance because the law says we do, but more than that, it's to communicate FDA's current thinking on advanced manufacturing technologies and fill in the blanks, as I like to say of the statute. So the statute gives us a framework of what we need to do and what we need to provide, but there's a lot of open-ended questions there. And again, what is the designation process? We know we need a process, but what is it? What should be submitted in that designation request? How does the AMT, once designated, affect application assessment? Because ultimately, again, that's the goal. And the guidance also explains other important details of the program. So I'm going to go through just 3 of these elements. There's a lot more in the draft guidance. I do have a link to it at the end of the talk, but I want to talk about these 3 main key elements that I think are really an important part of the program. So the process would start off with what we call a requester, developing a proposed AMT. And this can be a CDMO, this can be an applicant, it can be a sponsor, it can be a Joe Schmo, somebody from a tech development company, it could be anybody. And this is something that's really cool and different about this program. So they have a technology, it meets the eligibility criteria, they want to submit it to the FDA. So they would submit that designation request. And again, it would be independent of an application. It would just be a standalone request that could be submitted by anybody. So then FDA gets the designation. So now what? And this won't necessarily be for everything that comes in the door, but if there is a proposed AMT and FDA looks at it and says, wow, we really have something here. This could really be a good fit for the program. What would happen then is the assignment of what's called a designated lead. And this is a great benefit. That is your go-to person. They will facilitate interactions with AMT holders. So these are holders of AMTs that have been designated, and also with applicants who might want to use that AMT. And there are a number of things that you would get from the designated lead: early interaction with requesters, And then after designation, interaction with not only requesters, but applicants as well. And again, the ultimate goal is to get that AMT into an application or multiple applications. And then the designated lead would continue to be a part of that process to prioritize application assessment so that they could have these applications that use AMTs to increase the efficiency of that assessment. So one of the other key elements I talked about was content. So what goes in the request? Supporting data and information taken out of the statute, but what does that mean? Well, we need a description of the AMT at a minimum. So if you have a proposed AMT, what is it? Tell us what it is. Very important, how does that AMT meet the statutory eligibility criteria? So the data and information in the request really should include information that shows us that the eligibility criteria are met, because that's very key for this program. And again, it should be specific to a particular context of use. Again, a term taken out of the statute, for example, a particular class of drugs. And this is a little bit different than some of the other novel technology programs that are out there. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit more at the end. And that is that you need to actually have some data, some development data about the AMT. So you can show us that it works. You can demonstrate that this actually does what it's supposed to do. And that should include batch analysis data generated using either a product under development, if you were an applicant or a sponsor and you had a product that you were already working on. But if you're a CDMO or you're a researcher, or even if you are an applicant or a sponsor, it could also be with data, batch analysis data from a model drug. And this would be a representative drug, like something that is similar to your context of use, for example, a particular class of drugs. So the other big thing we talked about was benefits. I feel like I keep saying it, but innovation is scary. It's money, it's risk. Part of what this program aims to do is de-risk innovation a little bit. And so it's really important that there be benefits to participating in the program and that we communicate those benefits. And this is part of what we try to do in the guidance. So the guidance describes early FDA interaction first with requesters. So these are the people who have a really good idea. They submit a proposed AMT. We think that that could be a good candidate. And there would then be communication with the FDA about that technology. Again, the assignment of a designated lead. So it would be a primary subject matter expert for that request, but they would also continue to work on that particular AMT and coordinate FDA discussions both at the AMT level and at the application level and facilitate communication as needed. And it doesn't just end with the requesters because, of course, we ultimately want these AMTs in applications. So it would also be prioritize interaction with applicants. And the way we describe this is higher priority for applications that use a designated AMT. So for example, if you have two applications that are part of some priority program or expedited program, one has an AMT and one doesn't, it would be to prioritize the ones that do have AMTs in them. And it can be that you are using it, you are referencing it, or you're relying upon it. And again, the designated lead would facilitate quality assessment of those applications to increase efficiency of the assessment process. So I want to talk a little bit now about another topic that is in the guidance, and those are differences between the AMT designation program and other FDA programs related to novel technologies. And specifically here, I'm going to talk about CDER's Emerging Technologies Program, or ETP, and we talk about the Emerging Technologies Team, or ETT. Those are really the same thing. and the CBER Advanced Technologies team, or CAT. So these look very, very similar. Both programs deal with technologies where there is limited or no previous FDA assessment or inspectional experience. The difference being that with AMT, it's really focused on the context of use. Maybe FDA has experience with a particular technology, but not for that context of use, not being used in the way it's proposed to be used as an AMT. AMT is also much more focused. It's limited to methods of manufacturing that are novel or used in a novel way. ETT and CAT, on the other hand, it's intended also for other novel elements, not only manufacturing processes. So manufacturing might be a part of it, but it's not all of it. And then there's this question of data. We talked about the content of a request and that AMT requires certain data and information to support the request. And so for AMT, you would need data generated for a particular context of use, for example, data from a model drug, whereas ETT-CAT are earlier in the process. And so there might not be any data generated yet for those programs. And if you had a really good novel technology and you wanted FDA to help you get it off the ground, we would actually very much encourage you to first engage with ETT or CAT and then go to AMT. They aren't really two programs that you do at the same time. And again, because ETT and CAT are early in the process, you might not necessarily have data yet. It could still be theoretical, which it couldn't be for AMT. And the next difference I want to point out is applicants would communicate with the agency for both of these programs and have increased and more frequent interactions. But with ETT-CAT, that interaction, that communication with the agency would really happen prior to submission of an application. And submission of an application is really a big part of that. It's a little bit different in AMT, where applicants who are using, referencing, or relying on the designated AMT in their application, that's when you would start talking to FDA. And then the last way in which they're slightly different from each other has to do with who exactly we're talking to, who FDA is interacting with. So for AMT, it's not only applicants and sponsors, but it could also be technology developers, and those developers are not necessarily applicants and sponsors. And ETT and CAT are, again, it's a little bit more broad. It's interactions with multiple public and private stakeholders. And there's also other aspects to the program that are not a part of AMT, for example, training, education, and grants. That's specific to ETT and CAT. So I have another quick challenge question. Which of the following is generally not included in an AMT designation request? A description of the proposed AMT, option A. B, data and information demonstrating eligibility for a particular context of use. C, process validation data for a specific product. Or D, batch analysis data generated using either a product under development or a model drug. And it would be C, because we would not expect at the level of AMT designation that you would already have process development data or commercial scale data for a specific product. I mean, if you did, great, but we wouldn't necessarily expect that this would be the case at this level. So I also have a list of resources. It's not quite as long as Dr. Burrow's list, but at the top of it, a document near and dear to my heart is a link to the draft guidance for industry on the Advanced Manufacturing Technologies Designation Program. And if you are interested in reading it, the next link is to the Federal Register notice, which tells you a little bit about the guidance. The information I presented at the very beginning about advanced manufacturing in general, that is largely taken from this third resource, which is FDA's website about It's about advanced manufacturing for public health emergency preparedness and response. And the next one is another really great FDA website, news, events, and funding opportunities related to advanced manufacturing. They're always updating this site. There's always, cool new stuff on there. And I also provided a link to my office, so FDA CDER's Office of Pharmaceutical Qualities. And the public docket for public comments to this particular guidance is closed. It was open for 60 days, but it closed back in March. However, if you have any questions, you can always submit them to CDER OPPQ inquiries. If you have some questions about a particular technology that you aren't sure if it's ready, maybe it's not, and you want to ask some general questions, this is really the best place to send those questions. And I can promise you it doesn't go into a black hole. If it has to do with AMTs, it's going to come to me. So I will see your question, and I will do my best to answer it to the best of my ability. So in summary, the draft guidance provides information about the AMT designation program, including recommendations on how and when to submit an AMT designation request, what the request evaluation process is for AMT designation requests, the benefits of AMT designation, and some of the differences between AMT designation and similar FDA programs. And I always end with this kind of cute idea that innovation is the active ingredient in regulating pharmaceutical quality. And I can probably take a few questions now or wait till the end, whatever anybody wants to do.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. Looks like we have a question in the room.
Thank you for your presentation. Very good. I like it.
Thank you.
OPQ here. Actually, I have a couple of questions. Actually, are you going to make this a pre-competitive actions, meaning that, will you require the participants to actually open their technologies to everyone, or is it an intellectual property aspects taken?
So I can't necessarily speak to exactly how that part of the implementation piece is going to work, but I can say we did get a lot of public comments asking about that because people want to know what's out there, but they also need their proprietary information protected. So that is something that we are taking into consideration as we develop the final guidance and as we work out the implementation. But as of right now, we're still reviewing and considering all those comments.
I see. And the other question I have is, and quickly, is this all related actually to the other mandates related to the Center of Excellence for continuous manufacturing? Is there a connection here?
So the only information I have about that is a little bit old because I presented on the program back in November before publication of the guidance. And at the time, the funding wasn't available for the Centers of Excellence. And unfortunately, I don't know too much more about it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm by no means a CMC person, but it was great, useful information to take back to my organization. But a curiosity question. So as a sponsor who's in a phase 2 development, you're continuously improving your own process and coming up with novel, right? So if we apply for this, how do you envision then bringing it back into development to progress towards the application phase, marketing?
So I will say, everything is really going to be on a case-by-case basis because we're very early in the program. Though sponsors who are planning to submit an IND, you can include AMTs in there. clinical data probably wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for AMT designation to submit to the agency. So it it would really depend on what the technology was and what the data you have is. And again, if if there's a specific question, you can always reach out. I will also again mirror what Dr. Burrow said, which is talking to the review division for a specific application is definitely a good place to start.
Okay, so the guidance gives us information for qualification for this AMT, and then if we have further question, we can just email to clarify whether or not we could qualify for a designation request.
Right. So if you have general questions about whether or not something might qualify or what you need to submit, those sorts of questions are better sent to the inquiries mailbox. And this is for CDER. The program is also for CBER regulated products, and I would have to find out where those inquiries would be sent. But once a request is all put together, so you have the data and information and it supports the eligibility criteria, that is what you would submit to the agency as an AMT designation request. And that process is in the guidance, like where to send it and everything else.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll take an online question.
Is the program applicable to devices or drug-device combination products?
So that is a good question. And no, the technologies that would be applicable for the AMT designation program, it really focuses on drugs, biologics, and API and manufacturing technologies. So drug delivery devices or device components wouldn't be necessarily appropriate for this particular program.
Thanks. Another online question?
In the AMT guidance, it says the content should be available to FDA, the designation owner, and sponsor who references it, even if it's included in a DMF. How do you protect the confidential information then?
This is actually, I think, similar to the question we received earlier. We did get a lot of questions about confidentiality, but also sharing of the information. I know under GDUFA, there is a similar, for DMFs, there is a way to share that information. We are taking those comments into consideration while we develop the final guidance, but I don't have anything specific yet.
Does anybody else have a question in the room? Okay, we'll continue with our online questions.
Once a designation is granted, how could multiple product applications utilize an existing advanced manufacturing designation?
So that's a good question. And there's a couple of different ways. I mean, an applicant with several different applications for similar drugs or a similar context of use could use that same AMT in multiple applications. In the case where the AMT holder and the applicant are two different entities, it would be by a right of reference. And as long as that AMT is appropriate for that particular context of use, there is a right of reference, or the AMT holder and the applicant are the same entity, it could be used in multiple applications. Though each application, this is also spelled out in the guidance, and in each application, you would then, at that point, need to obviously have all your CMC data for your particular product that is the subject of that application. You wouldn't take your model data and stick it in your application. So it could be leveraged across multiple applications, either from the same applicant or between different applicants with a right of reference.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation. I think I heard you say that during this AMT process, there's no need for validation. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, that was the challenge question. So process validation, that is data that you would be expected to have later in the development process.
So that is the confusion I have.
Mhm.
If you're down the road, you have now entered, you have been designated with this this manufacturing technology.
Mhm.
You're way down into the road. We are trying to validate and everything falls apart. What happens then?
Right. So that's a really good question, and that points to the difference between an AMT designation and application approval, because it's two different things. And so I guess there's pros and cons to everything. So the data that would be in the request to support the AMT designation, that would be where you have your batch analysis data for a model drug, and you don't necessarily need to have that level of data that shows, you can produce at commercial scale. However, if you're then talking about further down the line in an application, that's different then. You could use that AMT, but in the event that you're trying to use it, it's the same context of use. I mean, if at that point things start to go wrong, things are falling apart, this is where your designated lead is going to be able to help you and facilitate conversations within the review division to see what's going on. And I mean, it's hard to speculate on how that would go because we haven't gotten there yet. But yes, when we talk about the application, all of the content and requirements of the application are still there. But what we're asking for AMT designation is going to be a little bit different. So you would still need to have PV data down the road. You just don't, for your application, you just wouldn't necessarily need that level of data for AMT designation.
Okay, that's all the time we have for questions. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for those great Q&As.
And I didn't lose my voice.